Loss of control accounts for around 10% of accidents on a motorcycle, or as collisions as we have to call them nowadays. It's probably a factor in many other collisions. So addressing loss of control and the causes of poor control and training riders to be able to control their machines better should result in a reduction in road casualties. There are four situations where a rider can lose control. Basically accelerating, braking, changing gear, which is unusual but can happen, and cornering. Where accelerating, basically what happens is the rear wheel loses grip. It's often caused by a rider snatching the throttle or using too much throttle. So it's important always to apply the throttle and all the other controls very smoothly, and to open the throttle gradually as the speed increases. There's another problem with large capacity bikes. If you open the throttle too far at low revs in a low gear, if you do lose traction at the rear, the rear tyre will suddenly spin up very quickly. The bike will slew sideways. The rider instinctively snaps the throttle shut and normally gets thrown back up in the air. If you're lucky, you can land back in the seat again. If you're not, you don't. But even if you do land back in the seat, you're probably not pointing in the direction where you wanted to go, so that you can end up going through the scenery. So throttle control is a real key skill for riding a motorcycle, particularly a modern bike with all the power that's at your disposal. It can also be caused by poor road surface, and the only way to really get around this is to make certain that you recognize where this poor surface is and take care. It's not always possible to see gravel on the top of a road surface, so if in doubt, the answer really is to go very steadily and keep the bike as upright as you can. Accelerating on a bend causes particular problems because you've got a trade-off between cornering and acceleration forces. I've shown the graph here. This is pinched from the earlier version of Roadcraft, and it's simple, but it shows you that there is a certain amount of grip available, but it's shared between cornering forces, which Roadcraft calls steering, and whether you're accelerating or braking. So it shows that the steeper the angle of lean, the more steering grip you are using up and the less grip that's available for either braking or accelerating. You can also lose control via braking too hard at the rear wheel locks. It can be caused by stamping on the brake too hard and applying too much pressure and not releasing the pedal as the weight transfers. When you first apply the rear brake, the weight is evenly distributed between the front and rear tyres. So half the weight of the bike and the rider is on the rear tyre. So there's plenty of grip there. Even if you don't use the front brake, as the bike continues to slow, the weight's thrown forward and the weight comes off the back tyre. So you need to reduce the pressure on the brake pedal or the rear wheel will lock. If you're using the front brake as well at the same time, this transfer takes place very much quicker. And in fact, the rear tyre, when you're braking really hard, comes right off the ground. So it's important if you're using the rear, when you use the rear wheel to slow down, or in an emergency, that you can apply it quite hard at first, and then as the bike slows, you need to release it to avoid locking the rear wheel with the chance of the bike going sideways. It's also at high speed, you've got the wind pressure on the rider's chest, and that tends to keep the weight on the back wheel. But as you slow down and that force diminishes, there's more chance of the bike tipping forward and the wheel coming up in the air and the bike slewing sideways. On a bend, once again, we've got the little chart which shows the trade-off between braking and accelerating forces. With a rear brake, if you apply it mid-corner, it throws the weight forward, as explained before, slows the bike down and allows the bike to turn faster. So you can turn at a lower radius. So it's ideal for using, if you do get caught out mid-corner and you need to brake, it's just to use the rear brake. That's the safest way. If you do lose traction at the back through treading too hard, then if you take your foot off the brake, the bike should come back into line and you should be heading something like in the same direction that you were before. The other thing you can do the rear brake is to trail the brake into the corner. So you basically leave the brake on as you turn into the corner. As you lean, you need to reduce the pressure on the rear brake, gradually releasing it as the grip diminishes. But if you do find on a bike you've gone into a corner too fast and you're uncomfortable, you can just keep the rear brake applied, as I say, and gradually ease it off. The bike will turn tighter and slow. It's having the presence of mind or the skill or experience to do that. You can also lose control by over applying the front brake. And once again, it's snatching the front brake that causes the problems. If you've got a bike that hasn't got an anti-lock braking system, you snatch the front brake. Modern brakes on bikes are so powerful, it instantly locks the front wheel and the bike immediately goes to one side. You can, if you let the lever off immediately, recover the situation when the bike's upright, and the bike will quite violently spring back up due to the gyroscopic forces in the wheels and the engine. Once again, if you stay in the seat, you're okay, and then you can apply the brakes again. And a lot of riders do that instinctively. You brake, feel the front start to slide, and let the brake off. And obviously, the faster you let it off again, the less out of control you actually get. But you really need to practice squeezing it at first, and then you wait only a second or so for the weight to transfer forward, and you can feel the back of the bike coming up and the front of the bike sinking down. And when it stops moving, you can then pull on the lever as hard as you like. You will not lock the front wheel, providing you've got a reasonable road surface. And what prevents you braking any harder is the fact the rear wheel will leave the road, and at that point you will have to let your brake off to avoid going over the handlebars. Although in reality this very rarely happens because it happens so slowly, and unlike a push bike, the weight is far lower, carried quite a lot lower. So once again, it's training riders to brake properly, squeezing it first, feeling for the front to sink, and then pulling hard on the brake. On a bend, once again, we've got the chart from Roadcraft showing the trade-off between cornering forces and braking forces. And again, as with the rear brake, you can trail the front brake into a corner. The problem with this is that the bike will want to go straight. When you go into a corner, the front wheels go out of line due to the geometry of the steering, and as you apply the front brake, the wheels try to go back into line again. So you have to hold the bike down. So if you go into a corner with the front brake applied, it takes quite a lot of physical effort to counter steer the bike into the corner. Initially you steer the wrong way and the bike falls, and then holding the bike with the steering angled into the corner against the braking forces. And like the rear brake, you have to release the front brake as the lean angle increases, or you will lose grip and the front will slide. And if it does slide in a corner, it's very unlikely you'll recover it. The bike will have fallen before you realise what's happened, and it's really unrecoverable. But you can do that. You can trail brake into a corner. Tarmac racers do it all the time. You brake quite hard and you carry a bit of brake into the corner, and it does have some advantages. It keeps the weight on the front tyre, which is doing all the steering. it sharpens the geometry, tips the bike up, which means it does steer a bit quicker. But you do take the risk that you could lose traction and the bike could slide. So it's not sensible to do it on a regular basis on the road, but it's a very useful thing to do if, again, you've gone into a corner far too fast, or you find an obstruction halfway around the corner or a hazard that you need to slow down to avoid. I've talked about weight transfer. This is from John Bradley's book, The Racing Motorcycle. As you can see, when you're accelerating, the bike can go up into the air at the front, and you can lose control because basically the front wheel's not touching the ground. And when you brake hard using the front brake, the rear wheel comes up in the air. Once again, there's a chance of being out of control. But notice that what prevents you accelerating any faster or braking any harder is the fact the bike tips up. It isn't due to a loss of tyre grip. Modern tyres are astonishingly grippy, and that the limiting factor on how fast you can brake excuse me, or how fast you can accelerate is the bike tipping forward or backwards. You can actually lose control changing gear if you change down too soon, because the rear wheel locks and the bike can slew sideways. You can overcome this by blipping the engine as you change down. You pull the clutch in, blip the engine, select the lower gear and let the clutch out gently. But very few riders do it. Old riders like myself know how to do it, because the old British bikes with the sliding dog gearboxes, it wouldn't change down unless you could synchronize the gears in the gearbox. So you were obliged to blip the throttle if you wanted to change down at speed. Modern bikes, you don't need to do that. The gears boxes are much better designed. But it does need care, and obviously as you change down, you need to let the clutch out nice and smoothly and slowly to build the engine revs up, and dumping the clutch as you change down has the same effect. Basically, if the engine's slowing down as you pull the clutch in, as you go to a lower gear, it requires to spin at a higher rate before you slow, and it's the difference in speed which locks the rear wheel. You can also lose control setting off from a standing start or changing up. If you accelerate too much, the front wheel can leave the tarmac. There's two causes really. One is just using too much throttle, and the other one is engaging the touch too quickly. If you dump the clutch quickly with too many revs on, the front of the bike comes up in the air, as you no doubt you will see stunt riders and some on the road doing wheelies, showing off basically. And you can do it quite easy. I mean, you can do it on a push bike if you want to, by pulling back on the bars, but clearly you're not in control with the front wheel in the air. And I've actually seen a rider on a track day at Croft go over backwards on the bike at over 100 miles an hour in the middle of the main straight, showing off. So he wasn't in a good way. So you do need to take care, and both with the throttle and changing up too quickly, using too much throttle, and being too brutal with the clutch. This is from the book Pass the Bike Test by Rupert Paul and Sean Hayes, and shows what most people believe is the correct line for cornering. As you can see, for a right hand corner you need to be in the left hand curve, gives you the best view, and then as you go around the corner and you can see the vanishing point moves away and you can see down the road that it's clear, you can turn the bike in towards the center line on a right hand corner and then accelerate away, and it gives you a safety margin ahead, as you can see. So you go into the corner with the idea that you can turn the bike harder and hit a late apex and exit, and the same applies for a left hand corner, except that you're up near the white line to start off with. You go around the corner. Once you can see the road is clear, you turn the bike tighter and accelerate away. The idea behind that is to try and stop sports bike riders tearing around the outside of corners as fast as they can with everything scraping. The idea is you're going into the corner at slower speed with the aim of turning it tighter when you can see the road ahead is clear, and then you can accelerate. It's actually quicker as well. If you're in a hurry or on a racetrack, it's much faster to go in wide and slower get the bike turned and accelerate away, rather than going right the way around the outside of the corner at high speed, because you carry the extra speed all the way down the next straight. We talked about the roadcraft diagram for the sharing of grip between cornering acceleration forces. A better theory, or a more accurate theory, is more circular tyre grip. The blue line shows the amount of grip you're using up cornering, and the green line if you're accelerating or braking, and the green line shows the amount of grip you're using accelerating, or the red line braking. Obviously, if you brake too hard, you're outside the circle of grip and the bike starts to slide. If you accelerate too hard, the same thing happens. So this is the Moore's circle of tyre grip theory. It's actually more complicated than the diagram in roadcraft, and we worked this out so about 5 years ago. The dark green area is the area that you use for cornering, and that leaves you the light green area for accelerating or braking. And you can see up to about 60 degrees. This is from a competition bike on slicks, so that probably should be more like 50 degrees on the road. You've got quite a lot of grip available for braking or accelerating until you get to extreme angles of lean, whereupon it's very suddenly disappears. And you can see pictures of bikers coming out of corners with the bike leant over at 45 degrees with the front wheel in the air. So the grip is there. Obviously track tyres have got more grip than road tyres, but there is far more grip available, providing there's a decent road surface, than most riders realise. The other thing is that there's a slip angle. Bikes don't suddenly skid away from underneath you. As you lean over gradually, as long as you do things smoothly, they start to understeer or oversteer. You can feel the bike drifting sideways, and tyres are actually designed to have what they call a slip angle. It's about 6 degrees on most motorcycle tyres. So as you get near the limits of lean, the bike will start to drift, and it's like understeer or oversteer on a car, so it shouldn't be unfamiliar to most riders. So really what's been happening to try and get around these causes of loss of control and the obviously not good outcomes? Well, frames, forks and suspension's a lot better. The old British bikes used to get into what we known as tank slappers. The handlebars would suddenly shake violently, and the only way to get out of it was actually to accelerate. If you braked, you just got thrown off. That doesn't happen nowadays. It happens with the early Japanese bikes as well. But you've got better frames, forks and suspension. They're far more rigid, so that doesn't happen anymore. And the better suspension follows the road a lot better, and that of course helps grip. Tyre grip is so much better than it used to be. It is quite astonishing. When I first started to race, one of my early races was in the wet, and I was braking at the 300-yard board at the end of Park Straight at Cadwell, and people were still accelerating when I was braking, and obviously following them and doing what they were doing, I could halve the braking distance, and I got to a stage where I could get the back wheel up in the air on a soaking wet track. It just requires some training and confidence. Anti-lock brakes are available now, front and rear, so if you snatch the front brake, you still won't lock it. The problem with anti-lock brakes, they are getting better, and I can't find any definitive tests, but if you do snatch the brake, it looks like the braking distances are extended. It is better that you apply the brake smoothly and steadily, because you get the weight transfer a lot earlier and you can brake a lot harder. But the systems are getting better. With regards to changing gear, you get quick shifters. You don't have to do anything. You just push the pedal up or down and it changes gear. And the problem of locking the back wheel through changing down too early is solved nowadays with a slipper clutch. Once again, that's come from racing, but you just change down. If you let the clutch out too soon, effectively what actually happens is the clutch disengages itself partly, and so until the engine revs and the rear wheel synchronize themselves, the clutch continues to slip. You've got traction control nowadays, so if you accelerate too hard, and the rear wheel starts to spin, it will stop immediately. So whether you're straight up or banked, if you use too much throttle, the computer on the bike will just knock the throttle off to prevent the back wheel basically overtaking the front. You've now got tilt sensors on bikes, so when the weight is redistributed front and back, transfer when you're braking or accelerating. If you did brake too hard and the rear wheel comes off the deck, the system will release the front brake a bit so that it comes back down. And obviously, if you've got the front wheel in the air, if you're not bolt upright, the bike can start to go sideways. Tilt sensors also prevent the front wheel coming up in the air and the front tyre leaving the tarmac if you accelerate too hard. So they prevent you either going over the handlebars or flipping the bike over backwards. We've now got, excuse me, cornering ABS. Got lean sensors on bikes now, so that if you're in a corner and you use the brakes, the bike knows it's leant over and reduces the amount of braking that you can apply. Because even with ABS, if you're banked over and slap the brakes on, it instantly, ABS works by the brake actually locking, or the early versions do, that the wheel actually locks and then releases the brakes. As soon as it's locked, it slides. So the brakes get released, but it's too late. The bike's already sliding and the rider's heading for the deck. If nowadays, the latest innovation is adaptive suspension. So the suspension adapts to the road conditions, and you can pre-program it and change it, which means that the tyres spend more time in contact with the road. So hopefully, like cars in the future, we will see accidents reduce due to the advances made. Thank you for your attention, and have a good day.